This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Tuesday, September the 11th, 2013. I'm Bryan Houston, and with us right now to preview the Dallas Cowboys' upcoming ball game against the Kansas City Chiefs is Rattle and Hum Sports contributor Matthew Postins. How you doing, Matthew?
Fine, Bryan. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you very much for being on. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the Cowboys so far post the New York Giants. First of all, give us an update on Tony Romo and Des Bryant, the two biggest names on the roster for the Cowboys.
Well, they both sound like they're going to be playing on Sunday without any real issues. Romo's MRI on his ribs, or his x-rays rather, on his ribs came up negative. So no structural damage. He's a little sore, but he should play, no problem, on Sunday. Dez's MRI on his ankle also came up negative, and he's a full participant in practice this week. So unless either has any setbacks, which don't seem likely, both should be able to play on Sunday with no problem.
Okay. Looking back at the opening win over the Giants, talk a little bit about some of the things that the Cowboys need to fix before they get ready to take on the Chiefs this Sunday.
Well, I think one thing they want is to get the running game going a little bit more consistently. Like we talked about Sunday after the game, they did a decent job running the football. I mean, they put up decent numbers. They, ran the football about 3.8 yards per carry, but they weren't consistent about it. They were a little sporadic. I think they'd like to see a little more consistency in what they're able to do in the running game. Another area is pass defense, and I'm actually working on a story right now about the numbers that the Giants put up in the passing game on Sunday. It's not so much a scheme thing or even a player thing. I think it's just part of it is simply the way that the NFL throws the football around nowadays. And Monty Kiffin, having been out of the NFL for 5 years, probably knew that coming into this game, but he perhaps underestimated exactly how much the Giants were going to throw the football. Now, granted, their running game didn't get going at all on Sunday night. They had to throw the football. But, they're going to be addressing the coverage issues that they had, especially up the deep middle in that Giants game as they play Kansas City on Sunday, because Andy Reid definitely knows how to take advantage of those sorts of weaknesses in a defense when he's scheming for his game plan during the week.
Okay, let's talk about Morris Claiborne as well. Played against the Giants. He was one of the corners that got burned a lot in this ball game and then suffered a separated left shoulder in the game. Is he going to be able to play this weekend?
It sounds like he'll be able to. They're taking it a bit easy on him in practice this week. He's practicing in a limited fashion, which means not a lot of contact, probably not as many reps with the first team as you would expect him to take if he were a full participant. So it doesn't sound like he's going to be that limited, although obviously the Cowboys are going to be working out guys like Sterling Moore and B.W. Webb a little bit more forcefully this week, just to have them prepared just in case Claiborne isn't able to go.
Okay, I don't want to get redundant on this, but we're talking about Tony Romo being able to play, but he was obviously hampered in the second half after he got sandwiched. And I'm wondering how effective is he going to be as far as throwing the football in this ball game against the Chiefs with his rib injury?
Well, I think it just depends on how they're going to be able to manage any soreness that he might have from that injury on Sunday night. You remember that he injured those ribs against San Francisco a couple of years ago, and he didn't have great numbers the next game, but he didn't have poor numbers. So I think it's really just going to depend on the severity of the bruising and the severity of the pain that he has to deal with on Sunday. Based on what we're seeing and hearing about in practice so far, it doesn't sound like the soreness and the pain is limiting him a whole lot going into this game.
Okay, and we talk about the defensive alignment and so forth. So when you're talking about what Monty Kiffin is addressing here, is he concerned about Mo Claiborne's effectiveness, as he had limited time in the preseason, came in and had to play basically without a whole lot of practice going into that ball game? How effective do you expect him to be in this ball game against the Chiefs?
Now, there could be some concern on his part. Theoretically, Claiborne should be a little bit better in this game against Kansas City, simply because you're talking about the cumulative effect of practicing consistently, even if it's on a limited basis, and getting some game action, even if it was on a limited basis on Sunday night. The scheme issues, or the issues they were having Sunday night, I think were really related more to the scheme and the way that the safeties cover in the cover two. It's designed to keep plays in front of the safeties, and the Bryan scheme was more man-to-man, which meant safeties would cheat up more, take more chances, and put themselves in positions where they could get burned a little bit more often. The cover two is a little bit more about keeping plays in front of you and, as they say, bending and not breaking. And I think what happened on Sunday night was you had some situations where the corners and the safeties cheated up more than Monty Kiffin probably would have expected and would have liked, and that's what led guys like Victor Cruz and Ruben Randall to get behind the defense. I think that's the scheme-wise thing that Monty Kiffin's going to have to address this week, is just reinforcing that the safeties have to keep those plays in front of them so they can make plays, so they can force turnovers, so they can limit the yardage that opponents get in the passing game.
Okay, I apologize for bouncing back and forth offense to defense, but now we get back to the offensive line, and Romo got sandwiched because of breakdown in pass protection. That leads to the question of what's Brian Waters' status? Is he going to be playing in this ball game? Is he going to be starting in this ball game against the Chiefs?
It's possible that he could play. It's possible that he could start. He was a limited participant in practice on a Wednesday. All he would really tell reporters was that I'm doing more now than I was doing yesterday. I'm doing more now this Wednesday than I was doing last Wednesday. So he's not really giving a whole lot of information, and perhaps he's being guarded just because there's a process you go through as a player when you're trying to work your way back into shape. But it sounds more and more like he's going to be given every opportunity to be able to play on Sunday in place of Mackenzie Bernardo at that right guard position. Now, whether it's a question of is he going to start and play that position the whole 60 minutes, or is it going to be a rotation kind of thing like Doug Free and Jeremy Parnell did late last year, where they put Bernardo out there for a series or two and then put Waters out there for a series or two. It could be one of those two things, but everything we're hearing makes me lean toward believing that Waters will play in some form on Sunday afternoon in Kansas City.
Okay, before we get to Kansas City, let's talk. Is there any other things out there about the Cowboys that we need to address? Any question marks, issues that they need to address getting ready for this ball game?
Well, in terms of health, there's good news coming down the pipe. Lance Dunbar and Danny McCray both started the week as full participants in practice. Sounds like they're on their way to being a part of the lineup on Sunday evening, or Sunday afternoon rather. Dunbar, of course, would certainly add some speed to that stable of running backs. McCray is one of their best special teams player, and they didn't really miss him on Sunday because special teams played so well, but certainly McCray could help take that unit to another level. Also good news, Anthony Spencer is at least practicing now in a limited fashion. It doesn't necessarily mean he'll play. He'll play on Sunday, but the fact that he's on the practice field, that he's participating, he's at least getting some work in, as opposed to just running on the side or taking mental reps, is a good sign that he might at least, take, what I have to imagine the Cowboys would hope would be 20 or 30 plays on Sunday afternoon. So the injury situation getting much better for the Cowboys. The only player that has sat out so far this week from an injury standpoint is linebacker Ernie Sims, but of course he's a backup, so not a huge deal there, but certainly you'd love to see Sims in the practice field at some point this week, but it's a groin injury, and with groin injuries you just never know how a player's going to react to that.
All right, as far as the Chiefs are concerned, did we really learn anything about how good or bad they are based on a 28-2 rout of maybe the worst team in the NFL, the Jacksonville Jaguars?
No, we didn't.
Simple enough. Okay, we can say goodnight now.
Yes, we can move on to the next thing. In fact, the Jaguars might be one of the worst teams in the NFL in the past 10 years. I mean, that team from top to bottom just is not very good. Maurice Jones-Drew right now, 45 yards rushing. I can't imagine how he feels about being in that situation right now. But, we expected Kansas City to be better simply because of adding Andy Reid as the head coach. I think the Eagles down the line will realize how much of a mistake they made letting Andy Reid go. But they did a nice job. They did an efficient job on Sunday against Jacksonville. Alex Smith had a good day. Jamal Charles was solid. Derek Johnson had a good day on the defense. I mean, it wasn't anything special, but for a team that's trying to really change the culture and turn things around, it was a nice momentum-building win for them. Winning 28-2, being efficient doing it, not making a whole lot of mistakes. An Andy Reid team, typically they don't make a lot of mistakes and they do a lot of good things on offense. Not a lot of yardage in that game, but I feel like at some point they will build toward that.
Now, talking about our Andy Reid team, the Andy Reid Philadelphia Eagles seem to have the Cowboys' number the majority of the time. Why was that? What was it that you could put your finger on? He's 17-12 against the Cowboys during his 14 seasons coaching the Eagles. What was it that he did that gave the Cowboys such a difficult time?
No, I think what Andy did, I think he did two things. I think number one, he's one of the expert offensive schemers in professional football. He knows how to build matchups and he knows how to exploit them. The other thing that I think really played into that was for a good portion of that time, especially early in Andy Reid's career in Philadelphia, the Cowboys weren't very good. I mean, they just didn't have a whole lot of talent. And Andy Reid and that staff at Philadelphia built a winner quick because they were able to get Donovan McNabb in his second year as head coach and start him toward the path toward becoming an all-pro quarterback. And then they were able to build around him in that regard. So they were just a better team for a large portion of that time than the Cowboys were, and that helped Andy Reid accumulate that 17-12 record. But even when the Eagles were having troubles the last few years, it always seemed like they would win one of those games back and forth. And I think it's just indicative of how good Andy Reid is at exploiting matchups on the offensive end. He knows how to take advantage of speed. He knows how to take advantage of it in space. And when you see guys like Jeremy Maclin and Deshaun Jackson and LaShawn McCoy put up the big numbers they put up in Philadelphia, you understand how good he is at doing that.
Okay, one of the issues with Andy Reid was that he never did run the football a great deal, even though he had some talented backs. He's got one of the most talented backs in Jamal Charles, but how effective is Jamal Charles going to be after suffering a quad injury against Jacksonville this past Sunday? And even if he was at full health, how much is Andy Reid going to use him?
Well, one of the things that Andy Reid did so well in Philadelphia was, and this is kind of indicative as you see things develop in the league over the last 10 years, is that now the screen pass, the bubble screens, the short outs, those are kind of replacing running plays to a certain degree. And I think it's because the bell cow back, to a very real degree, has become a thing of the past. You don't see a lot of three-down backs anymore in the NFL. So that leads coaches to try and find ways to exploit matchups and use players of different styles in different ways. And you saw Andy Reid do that a lot in Philadelphia. You see Sean Payton do it a lot in New Orleans right now. So the lack of a running game is partly scheme. Andy Reid wants to use those types of passes to exploit matchups in the open field. For the piece I'm working on regarding Monty Kiffin, in just the last 5 years, NFL teams have attempted nearly 2,000 more passes overall over the course of the season than they were attempting 5 years ago. So that tells you how far offensive coordinators are going away from the running game. So part of it is scheme, part of it is the specialization of talent in the backfield, and part of it is you just don't have those bell cow backs anymore like Tony Dorsett and Marshall Faulk that could run the football, catch the football, and play all three downs.
All right, the other issue here is Alex Smith, who was deemed expendable by the San Francisco 49ers even after he had led his team to an undefeated record mid-season. They decided that Colin Kaepernick was better and they could afford to cut him loose. How good is he? How good can Andy Reid make him, and how dangerous will he be against the Cowboys this weekend?
Well, I've always felt as if Alex Smith's potential had been a bit untapped in San Francisco, and it took, a guy like Jim Harbaugh to finally figure out how to use him. He doesn't have a particularly strong arm, but he is accurate, and he can run an offense well, and I think Jim Harbaugh finally put him within a structure where he could be successful. Andy Reid's offense is a little bit different in that it's more West Coast oriented than it is power running. There are going to be a lot more single back sets in that offense than running back fullback sets as there are in the San Francisco offensive formation. You're going to have to deal with a less skilled offensive line in Kansas City, at least for the time being. So, I would anticipate that Alex Smith will struggle a little bit in the long term. In the short term, Andy Reid's really good at putting his quarterbacks in positions where they can be successful. And the thing about Alex Smith is that he does have the ability to run the football. And he's not a Colin Kaepernick or a Russell Wilson, but he does have the ability to be mobile. He does have the ability to make plays in space. And, Andy Reid showed that he could use that in Philadelphia with Michael Vick and to a lesser degree Donovan McNabb. So I think what you'll see on Sunday is I think you'll see a quarterback who is going to work in space a little bit, not on a regular basis, and is going to sit in the pocket a little bit more, try to read coverages, pick things apart. I think he's a quarterback that can be rattled to some degree by the blitz. Although if you're getting a rush from the front four, you're not going to see a whole lot of blitzing out of Dallas. I think in the long term, Alex Smith's going to be very good for Andy Reid, and Andy Reid's going to be very good for Alex Smith. But they're still in that period where they're still learning what works for each other as quarterback and head coach. And, mistakes will be made, and the Cowboys could potentially take advantage of that on Sunday.
All right, before we get to the keys to victory this weekend, talk a little bit about the fact that NFC Special Teams Player of the Week is the Cowboys' Dwayne Harris.
Well, you know what? I've liked this kid for a couple of years now. What I like about him is that I feel like as a receiver, he's very well-rounded. He's got the size you like at that position. He has the speed you like at that position. He has very good hands. He doesn't drop a whole lot of passes. He's a very well-rounded receiver. He just hasn't gotten the opportunity to really show that. And now that the Cowboys are really trying to give that number 3 position to Terrence Williams, I'm not sure Dwayne Harris will ever get a fair shake. So he really had to put himself in a position where he could show that he could not just be a guy who could return kickoffs and return punts. He had to be able to help them on coverage units too. And he really showed that on Sunday night with 3 tackles, one of those being the one that jarred the football loose that led to a turnover in the first half. He did well on returns. I'd like to see the Cowboys continue to use him on both kickoffs and punts as opposed to just punts, but that's just me. I thought he excelled in that role, in both of those roles last year. But if you're going to use him on coverage units, you got to be careful not to wear him out. So I think it's a great honor for Dwayne. I think it's one of those honors that might compel the Cowboys to give him some more opportunities at the receiver position, because it's obvious Terrence Williams and Tony Romo aren't on the same page yet due to the injury. They will be at some point, but in the interim, I can see the Cowboys rewarding Dwayne Harris for his work on special teams with a few more reps in the passing game, and that's something that could really benefit the Cowboys.
Well, and you just mentioned something I was going to address, is the fact that how much trust can they have in Terrence Williams after his showing this past weekend?
Probably not much more than they had coming into that game. I think the Cowboys understand that because of the concussion, because of the 2 weeks he missed during camp and the preseason games, that he's not where he needs to be yet in terms of being in the same rhythm with Tony Romo. I mean, the interception was obviously Williams' fault. He even said after the game that he broke off the route, and that's a real rookie mistake. Those are the kinds of mistakes Des Bryant was making his rookie and second year in the NFL. He was cutting off routes when he wasn't supposed to. So that's something that's going to have to be learned over time. In college, give a bigger margin for error with those kinds of things. You don't have a margin for error like that in the NFL. You have to run the route that the quarterback calls, even if it's going to get cut off by the defensive back or even if the ball's not coming your way. You have to run the route because you have to respect the offense. And you have to respect the fact that if the quarterback goes through his progressions and doesn't find anybody, you may end up with the football anyway.
Okay, very good. All right, as far as keys to victory in this ball game, what has to happen for the Cowboys to win this ball game on Sunday? Well,
I think we saw a really good formula for it on Sunday. So let's just start with the turnovers. Few mistakes on offense and force a couple, 3 mistakes on defense. Obviously, they're not going to force 10 or 6 turnovers from Kansas City like they did on Sunday night against the Giants. But if this team can average 2 turnovers a game, 2 turnovers forced, then that's going to give the offense 2 extra possessions to try and score the football. And that's going to help them on down the line. Going in tandem with that, number 2, the Cowboys have got to get better at converting opportunities off of turnovers and in the red zone. They did not do a particularly good job of converting turnovers into points. In fact, the defense turned turnovers into 14 points. The offense only turned in 10, so that has to get better. They also have to get better in the red zone. They were 5 of 15. They were 5 of 15 on third down. They only scored 1 touchdown in the red zone on Sunday nights. They've got to get better in all 3 of those categories, and those were categories where they struggled last year. They struggled in the red zone. They struggled on third down, and that's part of the reason some of those drives stalled on Sunday night. Offensively, I think the Cowboys would love to see the running game get going again. I don't think they want to see a situation where they're calling twice as many pass plays as run plays again. I think if Bryan Waters is in there blocking at right guard, I think that's going to help them a little bit. But I think more importantly, it's just going to be a situation where the Cowboys are just going to have to get a better push inside and use DeMarco Murray in a way in which he can make that one cut in the zone blocking scheme and get up the field. That may just be a thing that's going to take time, but if they run the football better on Sunday, that's going to help Romo, that's going to help the passing game, that's going to take some heat off of Des Bryant, and it's going to help them with time of possession and keeping Andy Reid's offense off the field.
Okay, one last thing before we let you go tonight. I want to hear what you have to say about Chip Kelly's debut in the NFL and the Philadelphia Eagles with the fast break offense that they put on the field against the Redskins.
I think it's very interesting. We've been talking a lot about the pistol this offseason because we've seen teams like Seattle and San Francisco employ it and have great success. But we've also seen college-type offenses come into the NFL and fade away. The run and shoot, really kind of faded away until the spread came back. The Wildcat formation comes immediately to mind. The NFL has a way of figuring you out. It usually has a way of figuring out what the fads are and what the things are that are going to stick. And I feel like the pistol will stick, but I think it's really going to be dependent on the personnel. I think this offense is the same way. I think it really will be dependent upon the personnel that you have on that team. Chip Kelly went to a team that I think has more personnel that can run what he wants to do than, say, Tampa Bay, where he was thinking about going last year, because Philadelphia's offense was rooted in doing more mobile things under Andy Reid than the Buccaneers' offense was under Raheem Morris. So I think he made a good decision in where he went. He has a more mobile quarterback in Michael Vick. He has quick, speedy players and guys like Deshaun Jackson and Shady McCoy. The offensive line it's got to get better. The thing about the offensive line at Oregon, they did so much conditioning. I mean, I've heard stories about the amount of conditioning they did and the amount of running they did. Nobody, could outlast them because they just did so much of it. That's the part where there's going to be some catch-up, not just for Philadelphia, but for the rest of the NFL. Chip Kelly's going to have to get his guys into a conditioning regimen that is going to allow them to play 80 or 90 plays a game, where he's going to have to platoon guys, especially on the offensive line, which is really interesting because we always talk about how offensive lines need to be cohesive together, and you can't really do that if you're rotating players in. So that's an element of it. And then the other element is the defensive element for the opposing team. They've got to be in better condition too. The Patriots ran some elements of this scheme last year in terms of trying to get more offensive plays, but even they were only able to get up to 70 or 75 plays a game. The NFL has never seen anything like this before. And whether or not it sticks will be dependent upon how successful Chip Kelly is in Philadelphia and how successful teams are at getting their defenses in condition to combat it. You saw in this game Monday night, the Eagles got a big lead, but the Redskins came back because Chip Kelly took his foot off the pedal. You know, I have never seen Chip Kelly take his foot off the pedal the way he did in the second half. He never took his foot off the pedal in Oregon, and that's something that he's going to have to learn as he gets to the NFL. You can't take your foot off the pedal.
Very good. All right, Matthew, what's coming up on Rattle and Hum Sports in the next couple of days?
Well, you know, we've got the story on the pass defense. Is it the scheme, or is it just the fact that teams are throwing the football more? We explore that a little bit. We'll keep you apprised of injuries and get you ready for the game on Sunday. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be in Kansas City for the game. I've never been to Arrowhead before. It should be a lot of fun. Very
good. Great environment. It's one of the best home field advantages. Cowboys could learn something from this. Cowboy fans, anyway.
I've heard the same thing you've heard about the decibel level there. It's Kansas City and Seattle, two of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. Cowboys fans definitely could learn a thing or two from the Chiefs.
Very good. Matthew, thank you very much for everything, and of course we'll talk to you after the ball game on Sunday and get a recap on the Cowboys and the Chiefs. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bryan.
All right, Matthew Postons for Rattle and Hum Sports. This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast. I'm Bryan Houston. Thanks very much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.